Hi, we are at 12:02. So I'm going to go ahead and start rolling. We've got a few housekeeping things so people can make it into the webinar while we're still going over those. First of all, welcome. My name is Shannon Kennedy. I am the Agriculture and Natural Resource Educator for Forsyth County Extension. And I will be going through this presentation with you guys today. Thank you for tuning in. It's always so great when we have a chance to talk with you guys about one of these topics, specifically IPM. IPM, Integrated Pest Management, is a really interesting topic, but it can get a little dicey here and there. Looking over some of the answers in your chat box, I actually see a whole lot of people saying that that weeds tend to be one of their difficulties. Beverly, nut sedges. I hate nut sedge as well. But squash bugs right now might be a really bad one. So we're going to kind of look at the process of IPM today. Keep in mind as we go through the presentation, make sure to keep your microphone muted. If we have questions, I'll try and remember to take a pause to listen if someone has something they would like to say. And at the end, we have a plenty of time to address any questions you guys might have. My coworker, Heather Colich, is on today, as well as a few others, and they will let me know if I'm not seeing a question. But yeah, let's go ahead and kind of roll on into this whole idea of integrated pest management. So IPM is integrated pest management. And our outline today starts with kind of the definition, right? So what it is and what the concept entails. IPM actually starts all the way back at prevention, right? So it is much easier to manage a pest in your yard, in your garden, or in your house if you never let them in the first place. So we're going to kind of discuss that a little bit. After that, we're going to talk about the process of integrated pest management, kind of this 5-step cycle you go through to make sure that you are implementing an excellent pest management strategy. We're going to talk about the options for that management strategy as well, and how you can kind of scale those options in such a way that you are doing the least harm to your environment, but taking care of the pests that you need to take care of. With this in mind, let's go ahead and launch into this concept of levels of pest control. So as I've already kind of mentioned, prevention is our first line of defense. You don't want a pest to become a problem in the first place. So planning ahead and figuring out a way to keep them out of your space is the best way to go. It makes sure that whatever you're growing or whatever your interests are protected, and you never reach a level that causes damage to a garden or a yard or something similar. That being said, life finds a way. We will never be able to keep everything out of a space all the time. So that second level becomes suppression, making sure that you are keeping that population at an acceptable level so that your flowers aren't getting completely eaten, or you are able to have a harvest at the end of summer. Eradication is that third level. It's kind of the last resort. But it's not really desirable, and it's not really possible either. The only spaces where this is something that people actually try to accomplish is things like healthcare or food services, where if you have a pest present in that space, it causes damage to other people. Eradication is also more plausible in those scenarios because you have a fixed space that eradication is taking place in. If you went out to your garden and said, I've had enough of these Japanese beetles, and you bombed the entire yard somehow with chemicals or pesticides, Even if you managed to kill all of the beetles present in that yard, you would end up having others come into that space from the surrounding environment. So eradication really isn't much of a strategy because it's just not plausible. So looking at that first step of prevention, when you have really healthy plants, it's similar to having a good immune system. They are able to resist the damage that pests bring into the space. If their leaves get chewed on, they're able to sprout more leaves because they have the right amount of nutrients and the right amount of light and other factors to be able to recover from damage from pests. Likewise, in the opposite direction, if you have a plant that really is not doing well in an environment, then it won't be able to recover from pest damage well at all. And so you need to kind of key into these factors that can cause plant stress so that you can make sure that those factors are taken care of in your environment. Things like poor soil fertility, light requirements, irrigation requirements, the temperature of the space that you are planting this plant in, or even how closely you're putting these plants together can all affect how stressed out that plant will be. So that is such a big component of making sure the plant never becomes stressed. You also need to kind of think along the lines of what pests are common for that particular plant. If you have a bunch of rose bushes, Japanese beetles are the classic example because they're everywhere and they affect a lot of different plants. So being aware that you have a Japanese beetle problem will allow you to go and look around, see what you can do to prevent the population of Japanese beetles from getting to a point where you can't do anything about it. You can research their life cycle. You can look at what treatments are effective against them. So that's really important to be able to plan ahead for. Along those same lines, and I kind of already discussed this a little bit, but it's worth mentioning again. This concept of putting the right plant in the right place is a classic in extension. It's something we discuss all the time with our clients. And you kind of need to look at your site and kind of make a list of what exists in that space. So what your weather and climate is. This is important because you have things like fruit trees that require chilling hours. And if you buy an apple tree and the chilling requirement is not met, you're not going to end up with a good yield of fruit. So being aware of what the plant needs compared to what exists in your space. The elevation and slope can be important. Elevation can mean that the site is more exposed and it gets more wind, and so your plants have to be hardier. Soil type is incredibly important. We have clay soil here, and that's across the Piedmont. Our clay soil is really, really bad at draining, and that means that we always have issues with root rot. So if you're looking at filling a flower bed and you notice that this ornamental plant you're considering has an issue with root rot, you might need to either change that flower bed to accommodate a better drainage in the soil, or you need to change the type of plant you're doing in that space. Light requirements are always important. It's why it's always on that label when you go to a nursery. But even down to the soil chemistry itself, different plants have different desired soil pHs. And with azaleas and blueberries, you want soil that is slightly more acidic. They do much better under those conditions. But the majority of our vegetable crops and other ornamental plants prefer a neutral to maybe a little bit more basic type of pH. And the pH will dictate what nutrients the plants are able to take up into their roots, just due to the chemical structure of those nutrients. So being aware of that, if you're planning on planting a flower bed, having a soil sample to know what exists in that space already is really important, so you can look at the plants and match that. Microclimates are really, really, really fun, but they can get a little bit complicated if you are not meticulous with it. So my example is, one of my favorites is planting a rain garden at the bottom of a downspout. Downspouts will flood a specific area with more water than the rest of your landscape. So planting plants that are able to deal with that higher capacity of water will mean that you have a little microclimate in this space of plants that require higher amounts of water. Another example is using the south-facing side of your home. That south-facing wall will receive much more light than a north-facing wall. And that wall will take up that light and convert it into heat throughout the day. And it'll start radiating that heat back out to the surrounding space throughout the evening. So this is really beneficial for winter gardens, because if you can mitigate some of that cold temperature, you tend to have healthier plants. Being aware of existing vegetation is one that people don't often consider, but it can actually have a huge impact, especially if you are considering something like an orchard. The example here is our wonderful fungal disease, cedar apple rust. Cedar apple rust is really unique in that it needs 2 different hosts to complete its life cycle. And it is particularly damaging to the apple orchard industry. So if you are considering putting in an apple orchard, you need to be aware of where all the northern red cedars are in the space surrounding your orchard. This fungus needs those cedars to complete one stage of that cycle. So if you remove those cedars from that area, your likelihood of getting cedar apple rusts on your apple trees tanks. It's never nothing, but it definitely reduces that risk. And always be aware of your irrigation sources. A lot of time, people will plan a garden in a specific space based on the light that's available, and they forget to look for a hose spigot. So be aware of where your water's coming from and what you will be able to accommodate. Matching those to your plants is always the goal. And if the plant does not match your site, you pretty much only have 3 options. You can change the plant to suit the environment. You can change the plant to suit the environment. You can change the site you're looking at planting that plant in, or you can amend the site and go through the process of making the soil better, or increasing the sunlight exposure by taking down trees. Changing a specific site to have more of the plant's requirements, while it's possible, it tends to be a little more tedious. So be aware of that factor when you're planning any type of planting. With all of this talk of prevention out of the way, we can kind of delve into integrated pest management as a whole. And IPM is this concept that you use all of your options for pest control, but you use them in a way that balances what you want to achieve as a gardener with what the environment and what your neighbors and possibly the pets in your area need to remain safe. And it's kind of like having a scale. On the one hand, you want to get rid of the pests. On the other hand, you want to make sure you are doing it in the least impactful way for the surrounding environment. So as you start going through that, you need to start looking at these 5 IPM components. You always have to be monitoring for pests. No matter what you're doing, no matter what step in the process you're in, you should always be scouting and looking around, because how will you know you have a problem unless you're looking for it? Identifying the pest is super important because it informs you on how to treat the situation and what is effective against that pest. Then establishing control goals and guidelines. This one debatably could be a step you take at the very beginning of this process if you had a really neat and linear way of planning out a garden and planning out the way of taking care of that garden. But this, after you monitor and after you find a pest, it becomes really important to be aware of what that goal is. So once you do that, then you have to develop and implement a control plan. That is where you start taking all those different options and putting them into place so that you have a management plan. And then you have to evaluate your success. We're going to go into each of these factors on their own. Repetition is always good for memory, so I'll do my best to make sure that we go through and discuss each of these in high detail. Monitoring, as I mentioned, really, really important, because how will you know you have a problem unless you look for it? This is best done if you go out and scout regularly in the landscape. You want to catch them before you have a plant that has just collapsed over, because at that point, your plant is probably dead. And scouting will make sure that if you go out and you see a squash beetle or a vine borer present in your environment, that you are able to take steps to mitigate it so that pest does not spread throughout the rest of your garden. You can look for insects themselves. You can look for evidence that those insects were present in the area, such as pupa casings, or a lot of times you can look for the frass that caterpillars will leave behind after they've eaten large chunks of your plant. You're going to always look for plant damage. You can also do things like sticky traps. And this image is of a house plant with a bunch of fungus gnats on it. And in this case, those sticky traps are more of a control option. But cases where you think you have something like cockroaches in your kitchen, putting out a sticky trap may be effective in trapping that creature so that you can get a better look at it, so you can identify it. Speaking of identifying is key. If you know you have a pest, but you incorrectly assign that pest an identity, then all of a sudden you're looking and you're researching and you're finding different control options. And those options will probably not be as effective against the pest you are seeing in your environment. So that kind of leads you to the question, well, what is a pest? And I'm sure most of you, as per your answers in the chat box, have an idea. But this is a destructive organism. It attacks crops, animals, or people, and it causes harm in some capacity to things that people are interested in. I am interested in having a lovely flower bed. So if there is a pest that is attacking my ornamental plants and getting rid of those blooms, that is a pest. It's acting against my goals and interests in my flower bed. A bothersome person can definitely be a pest too. I'm sure we all have experiences with that. But our examples are sometimes the place where people are a little caught off guard. So weeds are actually probably the number one thing that you need to be looking out for. And the reason for this is that not only are they a space where insects and disease can kind of harbor and stay safe in your environment, but they also compete with plants for all of those resources that you worked really hard to make sure the plant had. They can take nutrients from the soil, they compete for plants with water, And if they are particularly tall species, they can even shade out your desired crops. So weeds and weeding is actually a really important component of integrated pest management. Disease-causing fungus, bacteria, and viruses are definitely also considered pests. And the reason for this is because they stunt your plant, they kill your plant, they take the fruit away before it ripens. Insects, mites, snails, slugs, all of these little critters do something to reduce the health of your crops. Root damaging organisms. Thankfully, we don't have as many nematodes in our area as some of our southern counties do, but they still can be an issue. And it really impacts the plants you have. So being aware of those, if it is a particular issue for a crop you have, is important. Wildlife, I've gotten so many calls about chipmunks, guys, oh my goodness, and moles as well. We've had so much rain that they are out in force and people are really noticing them in their yards, and they are considered pests. People are pests, and the reason they're kind of in this category is because you will end up in a situation where someone may have damaged a plant without knowing it. An example of this would be if you had construction happening near or on your property and someone accidentally, tore a hole in the bark of a tree with heavy equipment. That kind of puts people into that pest category because even though they may not have noticed it or they didn't realize the impact they had, scraping off that bark leaves that tree susceptible to disease and other unfortunate circumstances. So people can be some pretty difficult pests to deal with. So after you first start scouting, you have seen a pest in your space, then you really need to decide, you can't procrastinate anymore. You have to decide how much damage on that plant is acceptable. The reason you have to establish this is because, as we already mentioned, eradication is near impossible. So the best thing to do, both to manage your expectations correctly and to make sure that the environment doesn't needlessly suffer, is to establish what is called an economic threshold. This line here is the economic threshold, and it is the point at which a pest population, treating it is economically valid. So here on the y-axis is the pest population, how many pests you have present. And as you go along through time, usually pest populations rise. And once they hit this higher blue line, this is the economic injury level. This is the point at which the pests in your space are actually causing harm in an economic sense. If I was selling corn and I had a pest in my cornfield, this would be the point where my harvest is negatively impacted. Either I can't sell the corn cobs for some reason, I'm losing plants and it is impacting how much I can sell. So you need to establish this economic threshold point somewhere below that economic injury level. You want to still have your product or your desired goal from the plants in your landscape. You either have enough tomatoes or you have a harvest from your summer garden. You want to have a pretty flower display sometime during the season. That is your goal and you can't compromise that, but you also can't completely eradicate the population. It'll come back. So you have to find that economic threshold and treat for just enough of those pests to where it is an acceptable yield from your plants for your goals. Moving along, you've decided what you can accept in a garden as far as pest damage. You know what pest you're dealing with. Now is the time to make that plan. You have to figure out what components to use to suppress that pest population. So the best way to do this is to take those multiple methods and make them work together to suppress pests. And I call this the order of applications, right? It's been a long time. I think they still use order of operations for math in school. But this is kind of the same idea. You have certain types of methods you want to try first, and then you work your way up. And this is the IPM triangle. It starts with the most benign and environmentally friendly method, and that is the cultural methods. We'll discuss those a little bit more later, but that is your habit in your garden. These are things you apply to space, and just by changing timing or changing how you deal with your yard waste or something like that, those actions can really, really benefit your yard or your garden. Physical and mechanical control are things that you do have to make a new change to implement them, but they still are pretty environmentally friendly, right? They're not a chemical. They're not some sort of damaging trap or something like that. And that is that second level. You will probably need to apply both cultural and physical and mechanical steps before you ever get to the chemical or biological steps. Biological applications are really interesting, and we're still developing some research on this, but we have enough knowledge to definitely put it into place. So this is encouraging these biological predators that already exist in your landscape, or bringing new predators into the landscape to control things like insects. These are really, really fascinating, and they're really environmentally friendly because, again, you're not applying a chemical. Now, chemical control can kind of have two spaces, two sections. Chemical control can be applied in like a repellent sense. You can use something like an oil or an insecticidal soap, and those are, relatively speaking, more safe for all the other people in the environment, but they're not as specific as other things. So you usually end up, if you're using an insecticidal soap, you're usually putting that out and you're affecting a group of insects instead of just one very specific insect. And then at the very, very top, this is your last resort, using a conventional chemical. People love to go into their yard or their garden and spray for something. It is really, really convenient. But these are the things that are really, really toxic for people, for other insects, for plants, that might not be the target of your spray. And not only that, but if you only use pesticides year after year after year, you run the risk of whatever pest you are treating for becoming resistant to that chemical. So reducing the amount of chemical you put out is really, really beneficial to making sure that you are able to treat and control that pest further into the future. A lot of our agricultural crops are seeing a lot of this because of our monoculture, large scale agriculture. And with all of those chemicals that they put out on those fields, they're starting to see resistances pop up, especially in insects and weeds. That being said, with that pyramid in your mind, your methods for control can kind of be split into two categories. You can have the natural controls that exist without human intervention. And these natural controls can kind of be manipulated by us, but they tend to be pretty large scale, whether in climate, the geography around your home, the shelter and habitat that is present in your space. These are considered natural controls. Now, applied controls are things that you very directly have to change, right? So you have to make a very conscious decision to choose a plant that has a host resistance to a specific pest. So that is an applied control. It's something you change. Chemicals are a very good example. Sanitation, even though it isn't a toxic chemical you put out, sanitation is something you have to apply to the landscape. Otherwise, it's going to kind of fall apart and become really, really messy. And when things are messy, they tend to be a little bit better for our pest populations. Mechanical and physical controls and cultural controls also fall under this applied control category. So going a little bit further into detail with these, weather and climate are pretty obvious. There are temperature, our drought. They work both in our benefit and against us sometimes. So temperature extremes or our general, how cold our winters get can often reduce how well pests survive in our environment. That being said, if we have drought, that can also really harm your plants. Natural enemies, these are those organisms that exist in the environment that prey upon the pest you are focused on. The picture you see up on screen is, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar, the tomato hornworm. These guys can just rip apart tomato plants. Like you will check on them one day and all of a sudden they're all gone. It's kind of crazy how quick they can completely decimate a plant. But if you notice on that hornworm, there are these little eggs, and those eggs are from a parasitic wasp. And the wasp egg will hatch into larvae, and the larva will consume the hornworm completely, and they will pupate and become wasps and go back into the environment again to find another hornworm. So it might be worth it if you see a hornworm on your tomato plant and it's got these wasp eggs on it, you might want to sacrifice a tomato plant just so that these wasps persist in your environment. That way, you're keeping around these natural enemies that will help you fight hornworms next year when you start having problems with them again. Geographic barriers, we can't really change per se, but it's worth being aware of. So something to kind of think about in this category is the giant Asian wasps that made it to Washington State, right? For hundreds and hundreds of years, we had the Pacific Ocean in between Washington and the Asian continent. But people breached that barrier. And so with the people came the wasps. So our oceans and our mountains are actually really, really important for keeping pests out of certain areas. This is the same reason that you will hear, if you go camping, you hear very frequently, don't bring your own firewood. Go to the location you are going to camp in and then collect the firewood that you will use at your campsite. If you bring dead firewood with you, there are microinvertebrates, there are microorganisms, there could be insects or beetles or viruses or any number of pests present on the wood you bring with you. And if you're moving from coastal Georgia all the way up into the Tennessee mountains, they might not have an issue with those disease-causing organisms or those damaging organisms yet. So you want to make sure that you avoid spreading it up into further reaches of our country. Food, water, and shelter are also really, really important. These can either give pests everything they need to survive in your environment, or they can be manipulated, and you can remove these things, and all of a sudden you have fewer of that pest present. I saw in the chat box someone agree with me that chipmunks can be a pain. They're really cute. I like them better than squirrels, but they cause so many holes. They dig up all over the place. And they really enjoy the environment we set up in our yards and gardens. So if you have a bird feeder you put out, chances are the chipmunks are eating the seed that is falling from those bird feeders. An idea for something like that, if you have a chipmunk issue, is there is birdseed sprays that you can purchase that contain the chemical capsaicin in it. And while the birds do not eat and taste the capsaicin, it doesn't deter them at all. The chipmunks do taste that, and they absolutely hate it. It varies. You have to get down to a pretty good schedule, and you have to get a good product for it to work well. But it is one of those things you can do to help deter chipmunks. They also need shrubby cover in some capacity. It gives them protection from predators like hawks. So if you have a really grown up and weedy area in your lawn or your garden, you need to change that shelter and get rid of it. That way they have less of a reason to stick around your property, and they hopefully will at least reduce their numbers, if not move away. Things like wood piles or rock piles, even deep mulch, I believe, you can get a lot of insects present in that deep, undecomposed, woody debris. So clearing that stuff out can really benefit you as a garden owner or a landscaper, because you're getting rid of these shelter limits that these different pests depend on. Natural controls are wonderful, and they're really environmentally friendly to put into place. But then we kind of have to look at applied controls. Natural controls will only do so much, especially with some of our more aggressive pests, such as diseases and viruses. So what you can do and put into place in your garden are things like planning on using a resistant host. There are always options for this. It's really easy to research a specific plant and see if there are resistant varieties. Native plants can also be a really good option if you are looking for landscaping plants that are resistant to disease. We live in our native environment. We live with the pests that exist naturally in the Southeast, and native plants have adapted and grown to be able to handle those pests in a reasonable way. So if you're looking for things like that, it's really nice to look at native plants because they tend to have more resistances than other conventional ornamental species. Hybrid plants are specifically bred to have resistances to certain diseases. And then actually in this picture, you can see some grafting that's taking place. And something that occurs a lot is grafting the top of one plant from one variety onto the rootstock of a different plant in a different variety, because the rootstock, there are plenty of rootstocks available that have resistances to things like root rot. And that is really beneficial, especially, some of our fruit trees or Japanese maples can get really bad cases of root rot, and it can kill the plant. So if you're able to put the top part that produces the thing you want on the bottom part that doesn't get the disease, it results in a healthier, less stressed plant. Cultural controls, these are the things you already do, but you could probably change a little bit. These are things like making sure the site is prepared well, making sure those nutrients in the soil are appropriate to the plant you are putting in the hole in the ground. You can scout, that's part of a cultural method that you can do. You can rotate crops throughout a garden space, and that really helps, especially with soil-borne diseases. A great example of this is some of our tomato wilt viruses. They can get in the soil and they can last there for a long time. But to avoid it, you have a space in your garden dedicated for 1 year of growing tomatoes. And then the next year you move that to a different section, a different plot of land. And you keep rotating that bed of tomatoes, and you all of a sudden keep that host plant that the virus is dependent upon, you keep it out of the soil for a prolonged period of time. So you're essentially starving out that disease. Using drip irrigation is so incredibly important. Funguses are one of our major pests, more so than any of these other types of pests. So making sure that water is delivered low against the ground and into the soil keeps the leaves of those plants dry. And when the leaves of the plant are dry, you have less of a chance of contracting a fungal disease. You can also change the time of day you are irrigating. If you're irrigating in the middle of the day, you are wetting the plant leaves a second time, and that gives fungus and spores a second opportunity to infect the plant. This is really important with lawns. So you want to make sure that you are irrigating when the dew is already present on the leaf blades or the leaves of the plant. Thinning your shrubs, your bushes, your trees. Thinning is really important. And the reason for this is you want to open up the structure of the plant. When you get a really dense canopy, and this happens a lot with topiary type plants like boxwood, you get this shell of really dense foliage on the outside. And the reason this is a problem is because plants give off water vapor. During the gas exchange, while they are using carbon dioxide, going through photosynthesis, and then releasing oxygen, they also release water vapor. And if you have this shell on the outside of a bush or a tree, you reduce the wind or the air that can flow through the plant, and that humidity gets trapped inside the plant. And again, this is really bad for fungal issues. You can also prune plants, and that is also considered a really good cultural control. Pruning out dead wood or diseased wood, things that already look sickly, or even just pruning to promote a good growth structure can help keep a plant healthy. Fertilizing at appropriate times and appropriate quantities are also really important, and having a soil test is kind of the cornerstone of being able to fertilize correctly. Moving on to other applied controls, physical controls are one of those really environmentally friendly tactics, but this is using physical things to deter pests. Fences are a classic example, but scare tactics are included here. You have, oh, I see a question. I'm sorry. So Carrie is asking what the difference is between thinning and pruning. They're very closely related. They're very, very similar. Pruning tends to be a maintenance issue in the sense that you are reducing, maybe you're reducing the size of it. Maybe you are taking out the dead wood of a plant. Thinning is a little bit more specific. It's pruning, it's a subcategory of pruning. Thinning is very specifically for the purpose of reducing the leaf cover of a plant. Thinning is also something you can do in like a garden row of seedlings. You go through and you pull out certain seedlings that you don't want to continue growing, so you have enough space between those plants. pruning tends to be focused on plant health overall, and thinning has to do with airflow through the plants or through the bed of plants or something like that. Does that help? Got a thumbs up. Awesome. So physical controls, those barriers, things like that. These are really, really important. Fences are important both above ground for things like deer, but below ground is also really important for things that might burrow through. Trapping animals is considered a physical control. You are physically removing an animal from your garden. But if you do that, you are likely to get the same animal back. Maybe not the same individual, but maybe say you are able to remove a rabbit from your garden. If you don't change anything about the garden and you just removed the individual rabbit, another one is going to come and take its place. So trapping is only effective if you put other methods into motion with the trapping. Next, we've got mowing. Mowing at appropriate times, at appropriate heights is really important so you don't build up too much humidity in a lawn. And mulching is another really good one because it suppresses spores under a plant or other viruses. Sanitation, it's the tedious stuff. It's the stuff that I find it therapeutic, but not everyone does. So if you don't like sanitation, maybe I can change your mind on that a little bit. So weeding, making sure that pests don't have that alternative host present in your landscape. That is really important. It also means that your plants have less competition for resources. Pruning and removing dead and diseased branches and then getting them off your property far, far away. That is a really important thing to do. And it's also, that's the principle you have to use for removing leaf litter or fallen fruit. If your leaves are falling off a tree prematurely and you've got spots on it, it means that that tree probably has a disease. And if you just let the leaves lay on the ground under the tree, later on in the disease's life cycle, it will release spores or it will become airborne and it'll be able to reinfect the tree again. So removing the leaves and getting them off the property away from your plant is so important. Mulching is important for this reason too, because if those leaves fall on the ground and some of that disease is able to shake off and get in the soil, putting a layer of mulch on top of it ensures that it's kind of suppressed and it doesn't splash back up onto a trunk or onto leaves. Clearing pest habitats such as rock piles or different, my example of this is we have a firewood pile in our backyard, but we don't get out and have a bonfire too frequently. So it might be an idea for us either to move the pile of logs somewhere else or to just get rid of it because we don't use it that often. That can be beneficial in removing the pests from our landscape. Cleaning tools is so important. I know I'm saying that about like pretty much everything here, but cleaning tools is something, it's something a lot of people hear and they take into consideration and then they don't usually implement it. Say you are pruning out a fungal leaf spot out of a tree and you cut the branch, you remove it, and then you go on to prune the rest of the tree that doesn't have any particular fungal issue. If you cut that infected branch off and then you don't sanitize the pruning shears you're using, you might be carrying some of those spores to other branches, and it will infect some of the healthy growth that is existing elsewhere on the plant. So using like a 10% bleach solution, just dipping the shears in them between cuts while you prune, especially if you're pruning out a disease to begin with, will help ensure that the rest of the plant or your entire row of plants remains safe and healthy. Applied controls for the more chemical sort of situation here. So biological control is encouraging a natural enemy to exist in the landscape. You can also use it in kind of the same way you would a chemical. So for Japanese beetles, the adults are kind of difficult to kill because more often than not, you have to have them come into contact with the chemical you're spraying so that it gets in their bodies and it kills them. The better way to go about controlling for Japanese beetles is to treat your yard or your lawn with some sort of pesticide that targets the grubs. Now, the really cool thing about Japanese beetles is you can use a bacteria. It's commonly called BT, and it is very focused on the grubs as opposed to being a broad spectrum insecticide that affects many different types of insect. And there are a number of different fungal pathogens for pests or diseases for pests that have been kind of made into products that you can purchase and apply in your landscape. And these are really, really cool situations because they are really targeted to the pests you are trying to control. They're also more desirable with that specific control because you're not affecting the natural enemies that you're trying to preserve. That BT, the BT product will not affect beneficial insects like bees or wasps. So having a really cool biological control option, if you have one for the pest you're trying to treat for, use it because they tend to be very specific. Chemical control, this is the top of our IPM pyramid. You know, we often have to resort to this in some capacity. So using fungicides or herbicides or insecticides to treat for an insect. You want to rotate what active ingredient you're using because you don't want that resistance in the pest to build up to the one specific chemical. And you want to choose the chemical that is most specific to the pest. If you can find something that it only works against aphids, you know, tell me. But if there was a chemical that only worked against aphids and no other aphid relatives, that would be the best option as opposed to something that would kill absolutely everything in its path. So once you kind of develop this plan with all of these different control options, mechanical, biological, changing the shelter in your landscape, and using maybe a little bit of chemical control, once you build that plan out, you need to put it into place, and then you need to evaluate it. If you don't evaluate it, you're not going to be able to know how effective it was. So observe to see if there's a change. If the pest population decreases, you did great, well done. Keep looking for other pests because it's a constant battle. If not, you need to look through your plan and see if you missed something or see if there's a different option that might work more effectively against your target pest. I see another question in the chat box. I'll get to it right after I talk about our additional resources. We are here all the time to take your questions. Our contact information is on the next slide, but we offer our services such as soil testing and lab analysis of both water samples and soil samples. We love to give advice. Obviously, I love to talk. I haven't taken a breath this entire time. So if you have a question, send it our way and we would love to help you out with it. So I also wanted to give a quick plug to the Georgia Pest Management Handbook. And the reason for this is because it gives you all of the information. Each section has like what you can do as far as cultural controls or biological controls, things to consider when preventing pests. And then later in that section, it gives you recommendations for control of pests or diseases or weeds or something like that. And it's what we use at the office. We always consult it. It makes sure to have the most recent information with the pesticides that are currently registered for use in Georgia. We also have a page completely dedicated to publications on agricultural-based topics. So check that website out if you have questions, or reach out to us and we'll try and send you some of those publications just so you can learn a little bit about the thing you're trying to get rid of. Here's our contact information. I'll keep it up for a few minutes, but I'm going to go ahead and address the question I see in the comments. And that question is, isn't overhead irrigation just like rain? And if so, why is it bad? You're right. It is exactly like rain. The reason it is bad is every time the leaves are wet, it gives a chance for a fungal infection or some sort of infection that way. And if you are using a sprinkler, you are usually watering. I hope you're watering during a time where it's not already raining. And when that happens, you are making the leaves of a plant wet during a space of time that it wasn't already wet. So it's increasing the probability. It's increasing the amount of time a fungus has to infect a leaf. It's just a matter of how often the leaf becomes wet. If you can avoid it, that's great. It means you're reducing your chances. I hope that helped. Let me know if it didn't. Okay, awesome. But yeah, do you guys have any other questions? Let me go ahead and stop screen sharing so I can see everyone on one page. Feel free to type it in the chat box if you have another question, or unmute your microphone if you would like. You can always go to our website, by the way, Forsyth County Extension. Just Google it. Our page is the first to come up. Squash vine borers. Are you looking for advice on the specific things to do to reduce them? Okay. What I might do is I might ask you to contact us in an email. There are lots of different components that go into squash vine borer control, some of which is cultural, and going out and scouting for them, because if you see them before they get into the vine, you can remove them by hand. But that is a really short space of time. And after that point, there's very little you can do. So it's really a game of prevention. And I don't know the chemicals for that off the top of my head. So maybe either email us or in the chat box, go and do a direct message to me and just type in your email and I'll get the information to you. You're welcome. If you guys need anything else, just let us know, but we are at 1:01.
Well, Shannon, thank you very much. Great presentation. I hope y'all enjoyed it. And we do have more of these webinars coming up. We've got next week, same time, same place, harvest tips and techniques. And then the week after that, on July 29th, seed saving. We've got some more coming up in August that will be evening sessions here at our extension office. So we have moved back to face-to-face. So I'll roll them off, but they're also posted on our website. So August the 5th at 7 p.m., we'll have fall gardening. August the 12th, fall lawn care. August the 19th, improving your soil. And September the 2nd, your home orchard. So hopefully you'll be joining us in person for some of our August series. Thank you all for being here, and we hope to see you next week.